Before we begin, please be advised that this story contains themes of suspense, crime, and psychological tension that some listeners may find intense. Listener discretion is advised. The scent of maple syrup usually brought Jessica a quiet kind of peace. It was the smell of Sunday mornings in Oak Haven, Vermont, a town so small and forgettable, it had been chosen specifically for its ability to melt into the background of a postcard. This morning, however, the sweetness felt cloying, suffocating. A thin veil over a growing dread that had begun to curdle in her stomach the moment she opened the mailbox. It wasn't the usual junk mail, the local newspaper, or the occasional flyer for a bake sale. Tucked between a coupon booklet and a bill for their new internet service was a single, plain white envelope. No stamp, no address, just her name, Jessica Hayes, written in a precise, almost elegant script she hadn't seen in 5 years. Her breath hitched. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the familiar warmth of the kitchen suddenly replaced by a glacial chill. David was humming a tuneless melody as he flipped pancakes, his back to her, oblivious. Emily, their 7-year-old daughter, was already at the table, swinging her legs and chattering about a dream involving a purple dragon. Their laughter, their ordinary lives, felt like fragile glass in her hands, threatening to shatter. Jessica's fingers trembled as she tore open the envelope. Inside, nestled on a bed of dry, crumbling paper, was a single, perfectly preserved white orchid. Not just any orchid, but a specific, rare variety, its petals a pristine, almost translucent white, its center a delicate splash of crimson. It was the exact same orchid, the one that had been left at every single one of his crime scenes. The signature of a monster she had helped put behind bars. Silas Thorne. The name echoed in her mind like a death knell. Silas, the untouchable crime boss, the ghost in the machine of the city's underbelly, the man whose reign of terror she had brought down with her testimony. She had seen him, clear as day, that night in the warehouse, the night he'd executed one of his own men in cold blood. She'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, a junior accountant for a shell corporation he used, and she'd seen everything. The cold, reptilian gleam in his eyes, the way he'd wiped the blood from his hands with a silk handkerchief, and then the ritual. A single white orchid, placed reverently beside the body. The federal marshals had promised her absolute anonymity. A new life, a new name, a new history. They'd scrubbed her old identity cleaner than a surgeon's scalpel. Jessica Miller had ceased to exist. In her place, Jessica Hayes had been born, complete with a manufactured past, a new social security number, and a carefully constructed story about a fresh start in a quiet town. Oak Haven was supposed to be a fortress of normalcy, an invisible haven, but the orchid in her hand was a breach, a direct, undeniable message that the fortress had fallen. She closed her hand around the delicate flower, its brittle petals crumbling into dust, a mirror of her own composure. She had to be calm. She had to think. This couldn't be real. It had to be a coincidence, a twisted joke, someone from her past perhaps trying to scare her. But the script on the envelope, the specific orchid, no, it was him. It had to be. Jess? Everything okay? David's voice, warm and concerned, pulled her back from the precipice. He was standing beside her now, spatula in hand, a faint scent of burnt sugar clinging to his sweater. You look like you've seen a ghost. She forced a smile, a shaky, brittle thing that felt alien on her face. Just a weird letter. Nothing important. She crumpled the envelope and the orchid dust into her pocket, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She couldn't tell David. Not yet. Not until she understood. He was a good man, a kind man, but he wasn't built for this kind of terror. He was a history teacher, a man who found comfort in facts and timelines, not the shadowy, unpredictable world she'd escaped. She spent the rest of breakfast in a fog, nodding at Emily's stories, forcing down tasteless bites of pancake. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She scanned the street outside their kitchen window, searching for anything out of place. A car driving too slowly, a stranger lingering. But Oak Haven was its usual sleepy self. A couple walked their golden retriever. A teenager wrestled with the stubborn lawnmower. It was all so normal. Too normal. After David left for school and Emily boarded the bus, the silence of the house pressed in on her, amplifying the frantic thoughts ricocheting inside her skull. She pulled out her old burner phone, the one she'd been instructed to keep hidden, never to use unless it was an absolute emergency. The emergency contact for the Witness Protection Program. Her lifeline. Her thumb hovered over the contact. What would she say? He found me. Silas Thorne sent me an orchid. They would ask for proof. They would tell her it was impossible, that their protocols were infallible. They would tell her she was paranoid. They had told her that once before, when the nightmares first started. But the orchid wasn't a nightmare. It was real. It was tangible. She paced the length of her living room, her mind racing. How? How could he have found her? She'd been so careful. They had been so careful. Every detail of their new life had been meticulously crafted. They had moved 3 times within the program before settling in Oakhaven, each move designed to tighten the net of anonymity around them. The last time, they'd even changed their last name again, a precaution the Marshals deemed excessive but she had insisted upon. Hayes, a solid, unremarkable name. She remembered the day she met David. He was a substitute teacher at the elementary school where she'd gotten a job in the office. It was a small town, and their paths had crossed naturally. He knew nothing of her past, only the carefully constructed narrative of a woman starting over after a bad marriage. He'd fallen in love with Jessica Hayes, the woman who loved old books and made terrible coffee, but always had a kind word for everyone. The thought of exposing him, of exposing Emily, to the darkness that was Silas Thorne, made her physically ill. She needed more information. She couldn't call the Marshals without absolute certainty, without something more concrete than a single dried flower. They would dismiss it as a psychological breakdown, a symptom of the stress of witness protection. She knew how they worked. They prioritized efficiency, not the anxieties of their charges. Jessica walked over to the small, antique writing desk David had bought her, a quaint piece that now held their family photos. She picked up a framed picture of Emily giggling, her face smeared with ice cream. Her daughter's innocent smile was a dagger to her heart. She had to protect her. Her gaze fell on the old desktop computer in the corner, a relic David used for grading papers. She rarely touched it, preferring her tablet, but it was connected to their home internet. She knew the risks of online searches, the digital breadcrumbs they could leave. But she was desperate. She booted up the computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She typed in Silas Thorne's name. The search results flooded the screen. News articles, old crime reports, even a few outdated mugshots. He was still in prison, according to every official source. Sentenced to life without parole. Maximum security. How could he have possibly sent her an orchid? It didn't make sense. It couldn't. Unless he had help. Someone on the outside. Someone who knew the inner workings of the system. Someone who knew her. A cold knot formed in her stomach. She scrolled further, her eyes scanning for any anomaly, any hint of a recent development. Nothing. The last update was from 3 years ago, about an appeal that had been denied. She tried a different search. White Orchid crime signature. Dozens of results popped up, mostly true crime blogs and forums discussing infamous cases. She clicked on a few, her heart sinking with each one. Other criminals had used orchids, yes, but none with the specific type, the precise crimson splash in the center. That was his. As she scrolled down a particularly obscure forum dedicated to unsolved cases, a post caught her eye. It was old, from 6 months ago, by a user named Watcher_13. The title read, "Thorne's signature, is it really gone?" Her blood ran cold. She clicked it, her breath held tight in her chest. The post was short, cryptic. "They say he's locked away, his garden withered. But some flowers refuse to die. Some seeds still find their way to bloom, even in the harshest ground. A whisper of white, a splash of crimson. The old gardener still tends his morbid patch, even from behind bars. Keep watching. The harvest is not yet over." A shiver ran down her spine, a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the cool Vermont air. It was a poem, a riddle, a chilling prophecy. It spoke of Silas Thorne, his signature, and the terrifying implication that his influence, his reach, extended beyond the prison walls. The garden was his criminal empire. The seeds were his messages. And the harvest, that could only mean one thing. He was coming for her. The post was from 6 months ago. 6 months. Had she been under surveillance for that long? Had someone been watching her, tracking her movements, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver their terrifying message? The thought made her skin crawl. She slammed the laptop shut, the sudden noise echoing in the quiet house. She couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken threats. The witness protection program had failed. Not just for her but for David and Emily too. Their new life, their safe haven, was a lie. A meticulously crafted illusion that had just shattered into a million pieces. Jessica stared blankly at the wall, her mind racing, desperate to find a solution, an escape. But there was nowhere to run. Silas Thorne had found her. He had sent her a message. And that message was clear. He was coming for her. And he was going to finish what she had started. The harvest, as the cryptic post had put it, was indeed not yet over. The worst part? She had absolutely no idea how he'd done it. And that uncertainty, that gaping void of information, was far more terrifying than any direct threat. Because if she didn't know how he found her, she couldn't possibly know how to disappear again, or how to protect her family from the monster who was now undoubtedly closing in. Void of information was far more terrifying than any direct threat, because if she didn't know how he found her, she couldn't possibly know how to disappear again, or how to protect her family from the monster who was now undoubtedly closing in. Emily's fingers traced the cold, ornate silver of the locket. It wasn't just old. It was ancient, bearing the distinct patina of heirlooms passed down through generations. But it wasn't her heirloom. It was his. A gift from Marcus Thorne to her years ago, back when she was naive enough to believe his charm, before the monster emerged. The engraving on the back, a tiny, almost imperceptible set of initials intertwined with a date, was unmistakable. M.T. plus EL07/12. It was the date of their first official date. A lavish affair that now felt like a scene from a nightmare. He had always been possessive even then, and the locket was a symbol of his claim. To see it now, tucked into an anonymous brown envelope in her mailbox, was a violation beyond words. It was a declaration of war. Her breath hitched, a strangled sound caught in her throat. Her carefully constructed life, the quiet suburban home, the loving family, the name Emily Hayes. All of it felt like a fragile glass sculpture poised on the edge of a cliff. One wrong move, one whisper out of place, and it would shatter into a million pieces. She had to call Agent Miller. Immediately. Her hands trembled as she dialed the encrypted number. The one she'd been told to use only in the direst emergencies. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the rising panic in her mind. The phone rang twice, then 3 times, each chime a hammer blow against her rapidly fraying nerves. Finally, a crisp, professional voice answered. "Miller. Agent Miller, it's Emily Hayes," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. She tried to sound calm, rational, but the tremor was undeniable. There was a beat of silence on the other end. A momentary pause that felt like an eternity. "Emily? Is everything all right? You know the protocol for this line." His tone was polite, but carried an underlying hint of irritation, a suggestion that she might be overreacting. It was the same tone he'd used when she'd called about a flickering porch light, convinced it was a signal. She hated it. She hated the way they made her feel like a perpetually paranoid victim, even when her fears were justified. "No, Agent Miller, it's not all right. He found me. Marcus Thorne found me." The words tumbled out, raw and desperate. She clutched the locket so tightly her knuckles turned white. Another pause, longer this time. Then a sigh. "Emily, we've been over this. Your location is secure. Your identity is airtight. We have multiple layers of protection. Everything you touched, every piece of information was scrubbed. It's simply not possible for him to have found you." His voice was firm, reassuring, but to Emily it felt dismissive, condescending. "No, you don't understand," she insisted, her voice rising. "It's the locket. The silver locket. He gave it to me years ago. It has our initials MT and EL. And the date July 12th engraved on the back. It was in my mailbox this morning, in a plain brown envelope, no return address, just there." She struggled to articulate the impossible, the sheer audacity of the gesture. Agent Miller's tone shifted ever so slightly. The edge of irritation was replaced by a more cautious professionalism. "A locket? Are you certain of the engraving? Perhaps it's a coincidence. An antique dealer, a random piece of jewelry. It's not a coincidence." Emily practically screamed into the phone, her composure finally cracking. "He knew. He knows. He's sending me a message. He's reminding me who he is, what he did. He's telling me he hasn't forgotten. He wants me to know he found me, that he broke through everything you put in place. The memory of Marcus Thorne, cold and calculating, ruthless in his ambition, flashed through her mind. The way he could smile while ordering unspeakable acts, his eyes devoid of warmth, the immense power he wielded, the web of corruption he spun, trapping so many innocent lives in its sticky threads. She had been one of his victims, lured in by his charisma, blinded by a false sense of security, until she saw the true depths of his depravity. That's why she risked everything. That's why she testified. She had seen too much, heard too much, watched too many disappearances facilitated by his network of human traffickers and money launderers. She had hoped her testimony would bring him down, dismantle his empire. It had crippled parts of it, sent shockwaves through his organization, but it hadn't destroyed him. And now he was coming for her. The promise of an anonymous, safe life, guaranteed by the Witness Protection Program, felt like a cruel joke. "All right, Emily. Calm down. I hear you," Miller said, his voice now devoid of any skepticism, replaced by a grave seriousness that sent a chill down her spine. "A specific locket with those specific details, that is concerning. Our protocols are designed to prevent any personal items from your past life from following you. This shouldn't be possible. Are you sure you didn't, or someone in your old life perhaps have a replica? Or maybe you mentioned it to someone?" "No, never. He melted down a specific family heirloom to make that locket," she explained, the horror of the memory making her voice tremble. "It was unique, and I never spoke about it to anyone after I left. It was part of the life I buried." "Okay," Miller said, a long exhale. "Okay, I understand. This is highly unusual. I'm going to initiate a full internal review starting with your file. We'll trace the mail, check for any anomalies in your protective detail, everything. But I need you to stay calm. Do not make any sudden moves. Do not contact anyone from your past. Do not try to investigate this yourself. Your safety and your family's safety depends on following our instructions implicitly. Is David aware of this?" "No," Emily whispered. "I haven't told him anything yet. I just found it." She couldn't bring herself to tell David, to burden him with the terrifying truth. He and Lily were her anchors, her reason for enduring. To shatter their peace with the specter of Marcus Thorne felt like an unforgivable act. "Good. For now, keep it that way. We don't want to cause unnecessary panic. Just keep a low profile. We'll be in touch." With that, Agent Miller hung up, leaving Emily in a suffocating silence, the locket still clutched in her hand. Days blurred into an agonizing cycle of paranoia. Every car that slowed down on her street, every unfamiliar face in the grocery store, every late-night shadow dancing on her curtains, became a potential threat. She tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for David and Lily, forcing smiles, feigning interest in their day, but the fear was a constant, icy grip around her heart. Agent Miller called daily, his reports always the same. "No breaches found. No anomalies. We're still investigating." The lack of answers was almost worse than knowing. It suggested a level of sophistication, a level of infiltration that was truly terrifying. Then, exactly 1 week after the locket arrived, another package appeared. This one wasn't in the mailbox. It was left on her porch, nestled discreetly behind a potted fern. A small, carefully wrapped box, tied with a simple silver ribbon. It looked like a gift. Her hands shook as she brought it inside, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was alone. David was at work, Lily at school. With trembling fingers, she tore away the wrapping paper. Inside lay an antique music box, crafted from dark, polished wood, intricately carved with delicate floral patterns. It was beautiful in a haunting old-world way. But Emily didn't see beauty. She saw a trap. A message. She lifted the lid, revealing a tiny ballerina poised within. As she wound the delicate golden key on the side, a melody began to play. It was soft, tinkling, a lullaby. An obscure, almost forgotten lullaby that her grandmother used to sing to her younger sister, Ilara, when they were children. A lullaby that Emily herself had hummed to Ilara in the days leading up to her disappearance, one of the many lives Marcus Thorne had consumed. It was a melody that no one else in her new life, no one in this town could possibly know. The blood drained from Emily's face, leaving her cold and numb. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't paranoia. This was Marcus Thorne. He wasn't just sending a message, he was playing a cruel, twisted game. He was reminding her of Ilara, of the pain, of the lives he had stolen. He was showing her that he knew everything about her past, every secret, every sorrow. He was here. He was closer than ever. And the witness protection program, the impenetrable shield she had placed her life upon, had failed. Completely. The tinkling melody filled the silent house, a sweet, innocent tune that now sounded like a death knell. Emily stared at the music box, her mind racing. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about David. It was about Lily. She had to protect them. But how? How do you fight a ghost from your past who can breach the most secure protection program in the country? How do you disappear from someone who knows your deepest, most buried memories? She couldn't rely on Miller or on WITSEC, not anymore. They were blind, ineffective. She was on her own, and she had to find out how he found her. Because only then, only with that knowledge, could she hope to escape the monster who was now, undoubtedly, standing at the precipice of her new life. She was alone. The words echoed in the hollow chamber of her mind, a terrifying mantra. The United States Marshals Service, the impenetrable shield she had trusted with her very existence, had failed. They were blind, ineffective. She was on her own, and she had to find out how he found her. Because only then, only with that knowledge, could she hope to escape the monster who was now, undoubtedly, standing at the precipice of her new life. A cold dread settled deep in her bones, a primal fear that made her stomach clench. Sarah Miller was dead. She had been for 2 years. Now she was Emily Hayes, a quiet graphic designer in the sleepy town of Havenwood, Nebraska. Emily Hayes, who lived in a small, unassuming apartment, drove a modest sedan, and carefully cultivated a new, unremarkable existence. But the ghost of Sarah Miller, the woman who had dared to expose Victor Thorne, had just been resurrected. And Victor Thorne, a name whispered in hushed tones in the darkest corners of the underworld, never forgot. He never forgave. Victor Thorne wasn't just a criminal. He was an architect of shadows, a phantom limb of power that stretched across continents. His empire was built on illicit finance, on shattered lives, on the silent despair of those he trafficked. Sarah, as a meticulous forensic accountant, had stumbled upon his ledger, a digital labyrinth of his atrocities. She had seen the numbers, the names, the sheer scale of his inhumanity. And she had done the unthinkable. She had testified. She had brought down a significant limb of his operation, but not Victor himself. He had promised her, in a chilling whisper caught on a wire, that he would find her. No matter where she went, no matter who she became, he would find her. And when he did, he would make her regret every breath she'd ever taken. The Marshals had assured her, with their stern faces and their thick binders, that he couldn't. They had protocols, safe houses, cutting-edge technology, and an unblemished record of protection. They had given her a new name, a new history, a new face in a new mirror. They had meticulously erased every digital crumb, every physical trace of Sarah Miller. They had sworn she was invisible. But the note had proven them wrong. She stumbled to her kitchen counter, her hands trembling as she gripped the cool granite. Her mind, usually so sharp and analytical, was a frantic whirlwind of panic. How? The question screamed in her head, threatening to shatter her composure. She couldn't afford to break. Not now. Breaking meant dying. She forced herself to breathe deep, ragged gasps that scraped at her throat. She had to think. She had to be Sarah Miller again, the woman who could untangle complex financial webs, the woman who could see patterns where others saw chaos. This was just another puzzle, albeit one with her life as the ultimate stake. She couldn't trust the Marshals. They had proven their incompetence, or worse, their complicity. No, she had to dissect her own protection piece by agonizing piece. She had to find the flaw, the crack in the armor that Victor Thorne had exploited. She started at the beginning, the moment her old life had dissolved into the witness protection program. She recalled the secure facility, a windowless bunker where she had spent weeks, stripped of her identity, undergoing psychological evaluations and preparing for her new existence. Every interaction was monitored, every conversation recorded. No outside contact. It was supposed to be airtight. Then came the relocation. The unmarked van, the circuitous route, the multiple changes of vehicles and disguises. She remembered Agent David Chun, her primary handler, a stoic man with kind, tired eyes, who had personally driven her the last leg of the journey to Havenwood. He had seemed so dedicated, so trustworthy. Was it him? Could he have been compromised? The thought was a bitter pill. But how? Thorne's reach was vast, But Chun was a federal agent, vetted, protected. Bribery? Blackmail? It seemed too blunt for Thorne's surgical precision. She moved through her apartment, her eyes scanning every detail, every object. What had she brought with her? A small box of sentimental items, a worn copy of her grandmother's favorite novel, a silver locket with a faded picture of her parents, a handful of old photos. Each item had been meticulously inspected, x-rayed, and cleared. Could a tracking device have been hidden in her grandmother's book? It felt improbable, given the thoroughness of the Marshals' review. And besides, Thorne wouldn't need a tracker if he already knew her address. What about her new life? Emily Hayes, her job at the local design firm, her membership at the community gym, her weekly trips to the farmer's market. Had she established any patterns that mirrored Sarah Miller's? She had been scrupulous about avoiding them. Sarah had loved hiking. Emily preferred yoga. Sarah had been a coffee snob. Emily drank instant. Every detail was a deliberate departure. Her gaze fell on her laptop, a standard-issue device provided by the Marshals, wiped clean and preloaded with basic software. She used a secure VPN, encrypted messaging apps. No social media, no online banking from her previous life. She paid everything with cash or her new, anonymous debit card. She was a ghost in the digital realm. But what if the breach wasn't something she did or something she brought? What if it was something they did? The Marshals, the very people who were supposed to be her impenetrable wall. She stopped in the center of her living room, a sudden chilling memory surfacing. When she had first arrived, the apartment had felt sterile. Standard-issue furniture, bland decor. But there was one thing that had stood out, a detail she dismissed as a minor inconvenience. The thermostat. It was a small, sleek digital unit, mounted on the wall near the entryway. Not a smart thermostat with a touchscreen, but a basic, programmable model, common in many federal buildings and government-subsidized housing units. She remembered the technician who had come to calibrate it a few days after she moved in. A quiet man, not a marshal, but a local contractor, vetted by the program. He had spent an unusually long time with it, fiddling with wires in the wall, muttering about a system update. She had found it mildly annoying at the time, wanting to unpack her few belongings, but she hadn't thought anything more of it. Now a prickle of unease snaked up her spine. She walked over to the thermostat, her fingers tracing its smooth, cool surface. It was connected to the building's central heating and cooling system, a standard setup. But what if standard wasn't secure enough? What if that system update had been something else entirely? She remembered a fleeting moment, a tiny flicker on the small digital display as the technician worked. It had been like a momentary glitch, an almost imperceptible flash of static before the numbers reappeared. She had chalked it up to faulty wiring, a new building quirk. But now, in the terrifying clarity of her current predicament, that flicker seemed significant. A chilling thought took root, blossoming into full-blown horror. What if the Marshals' cutting-edge technology wasn't just about protecting her, but also about monitoring her? What if, in their zeal to keep her safe, they had inadvertently created a backdoor of vulnerability? Or worse, what if someone within the program, someone with access to these supposedly secure systems, had deliberately planted a beacon? Her eyes darted around the apartment, every seemingly innocuous device now a potential spy. The smoke detector on the ceiling, the carbon monoxide alarm near the kitchen, even the small, unblinking light of the router provided by the internet company. All standard, all potentially compromised. The note had been placed on her pillow, inside her meticulously secured apartment. That meant Victor Thorne or one of his operatives had been inside. He hadn't just found her location. He had breached her physical sanctuary. The thermostat, the technician, the flicker. The pieces began to coalesce into a terrifying hypothesis. If the Marshals had installed a standard network device, and that device had been compromised, it could act as a silent digital breadcrumb. Not just for her location, but potentially for her daily movements within the apartment. A subtle, almost imperceptible way to confirm she was indeed Emily Hayes, living in this specific apartment, before Thorne made his move. She pressed her ear against the wall beside the thermostat, listening. Silence. But the silence now felt heavy, pregnant with unseen eyes. The monster wasn't just at the precipice of her new life. He was already inside. And he had used the very system meant to protect her, to guide him straight to her doorstep. The implications were staggering, the betrayal absolute. She wasn't just running from Victor Thorne. She was running from the ghost of her own protection. The realization hit Emily with the force of a physical blow. A cold dread that seeped into her bones. She didn't just need to disappear. She needed to vanish from the very fabric of existence, because the system designed to make her invisible had instead painted a target on her back. Victor Thorne wasn't just a ghost from her past. He was a predator guided by the very people sworn to protect her. She remembered the night he found her, a memory that now replayed with sickening clarity. It was a Tuesday, just past midnight, in the quiet suburban house that was supposed to be her sanctuary. She had been asleep, lulled into a false sense of security by months of uneventful peace. Then the faint, almost imperceptible creak of a floorboard downstairs. Her eyes had snapped open, heart hammering against her ribs. She'd dismissed it at first, a settling house, a branch scraping against a window. But then a distinct rustle, followed by a low guttural murmur. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. Fear, cold and sharp, had seized her. She'd slid out of bed, her bare feet silent on the carpet, reaching for the small, heavy flashlight she kept on her nightstand. Every instinct screamed at her to freeze, to hide. But a primal urge to understand, to confront, had pulled her towards the bedroom door. She peered through the crack, down the darkened hallway. Nothing. The silence was heavier now, suffocating. Then from the living room below, a voice. Low, gravelly, and utterly familiar. "Emily, I know you're here." It was Victor. Her blood ran cold. How could he be here? She'd been so careful. Her new identity, her new life, meticulously crafted by the Witness Protection Program. She was Sarah Miller now, a librarian with a quiet life, no connections to her past as Emily Carter, the woman who had testified against Victor Thorne. Panic, raw and unthinking, had flooded her. She had scrambled, not daring to make a sound, to the back window of her bedroom. It overlooked a small, overgrown garden and then a dense patch of woods. Her WPP handler, Agent Michael Thompson, had always emphasized the escape routes. Always have a plan, Emily. Always. She didn't need a plan now. She needed a miracle. She fumbled with the latch, her fingers clumsy with terror. The window slid open with a soft groan. Below, she could hear Victor's heavy footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, savoring the hunt. He knew she was here. He was here to finish it. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, she had dropped out the window, landing hard on the damp earth below. A sharp pain shot through her ankle, but she ignored it, pushing herself up and scrambling into the darkness of the woods. Branches whipped at her face, thorns tore at her skin, but she didn't stop. She ran until her lungs burned, until the sounds of the house were swallowed by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. She ran for miles through the dense undergrowth, not daring to look back, not daring to pause until she collapsed, breathless and shaking, in a ditch by the side of a deserted road. The moon was a sliver in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows. Her ankle throbbed, a dull ache that mirrored the terror in her chest. It was there, huddled in the cold, damp earth, that the stark, horrifying truth began to crystallize. Victor shouldn't have known. No one should have known. The WPP had promised anonymity, absolute secrecy. Her new life was supposed to be a fortress, but Victor had walked straight to her door, as if guided by an invisible hand. The pieces, once scattered and seemingly innocuous, now clicked into place with chilling precision. Agent Thompson had been the only one who knew her exact location. He was the one who had brought her the monthly stipend, the new library card, the occasional updates on her fabricated backstory. He was the only one with access to her file, her new name, her address, her completely untraceable phone number. A wave of nausea washed over her. Michael. Could it be Michael? He had seemed so earnest, so dedicated. He had spoken of the importance of the program, of protecting those brave enough to stand up to criminals like Thorne. He had reassured her time and again that she was safe, that her new life was impenetrable. Was it all a lie? A carefully constructed charade designed to lull her into a false sense of security, to make her an easier target? The thought was almost as terrifying as Victor Thorne himself. If Michael, her protector, was compromised, then who could she trust? There was no one. The entire system, the very foundation of her supposed safety, had been turned against her. She remembered a few odd things now, small details she had dismissed at the time. A comment Michael made once about her love for a particular brand of coffee, A detail he couldn't have known unless he'd been watching her more closely than necessary. Or the time he had accidentally left a file open on his tablet during a visit, revealing a partial address that now, in retrospect, looked suspiciously like a previous WPP safe house she'd occupied briefly before moving to the final, supposedly permanent, location. She had shrugged it off then in oversight. Now it felt like a breadcrumb. The betrayal was a suffocating weight. She wasn't just running from Victor Thorne. She was running from the ghost of her own protection. She was a woman without a country, without a name, without a safe harbor. Every shadow was a potential informant, every passing car a threat. The world had shrunk to a terrifying, claustrophobic sphere of constant danger. She needed to think, to plan. But her mind was a whirlwind of fear and indignation. The immediate priority was survival. She had nothing on her but the clothes she was wearing, a broken ankle, and the desperate will to live. She needed money, a new identity, a way to disappear without leaving a digital trace. But how? The WPP had handled all of that. Now she was on her own. Her gaze fell on her left wrist. The small, almost imperceptible scar from a childhood accident. It was the only physical mark that connected her to Emily Carter, her old self. And it was a mark that Victor Thorne would recognize. She needed to change everything. A cold resolve began to settle over her, replacing the initial panic. She couldn't just run forever. She couldn't just disappear into the shadows. She needed answers. Who was the mole? How deep did the corruption go? And why her? Was it just about Victor? Or was there something more? She knew she couldn't go to the police. They would just funnel her back into the very program that had failed her. She couldn't trust any official channels. Her only option was to fight back, to expose the truth from the outside. But how does one woman, stripped of her identity and resources, take on a powerful criminal organization and a corrupt government program? Her mind raced, sifting through memories, desperate for any leverage, any forgotten detail that could help her. She remembered her old life as Emily Carter, a life she had tried so hard to forget. She had been a junior accountant at Thorne's legitimate businesses, tasked with finding discrepancies, uncovering the paper trail. She had found a lot more than discrepancies. She had found a vast network of money laundering, extortion, and illicit dealings. She had found the truth, and it had almost cost her everything. Now that old life, the one she had fled, suddenly seemed like a source of potential strength. She had learned things about Thorne's operations, about his weaknesses, about the people he worked with. Maybe, just maybe, there was someone from her past, someone outside of Thorne's direct influence, someone she could trust. Her thoughts drifted to her former boss, David Chun. He had always seemed honorable, though somewhat naive to the true nature of Thorne's empire. He was rigid, rule-bound, a stickler for ethics. Could he be a reluctant ally? Or would contacting him put him in danger, or worse, lead Thorne straight to her again? The risk was immense. She pushed herself up, wincing as her ankle protested. The ditch was no longer safe. She needed to move, to find shelter, to figure out her next steps. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, risks, and desperate possibilities. She had to become a ghost, not just to Victor Thorne, but to the entire system that had betrayed her. And then, when she was truly invisible, she would turn the tables. She would hunt the hunter. She would expose the mole. She would find out who had sold her out, and she would make them pay. The game had changed. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about vengeance. The game had changed. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about vengeance. Jessica felt a cold, crystalline clarity settle over her mind, replacing the panic that had clawed at her since the ambush. Every instinct honed by a lifetime of living on the edge, a lifetime she tried to bury, resurfaced with brutal efficiency. She was a ghost, truly invisible now. The government had stripped her of everything, but in doing so, they had inadvertently given her the ultimate weapon: anonymity. No name, no address, no paper trail. She was a phantom, free to move through the shadows, unseen and unheard. Her first priority was to secure resources, money, a new identity, and information. She couldn't rely on the system that had betrayed her. Her mind raced, sifting through memories, searching for forgotten pockets of her old life. There was one, a contingency, a relic from a time before she ever dreamed of witness protection. A small waterproof container, buried deep beneath the roots of a gnarled oak tree in a forgotten corner of Lincoln Park, Chicago. It held a meager sum carefully accumulated over years, A just-in-case fund for the unexpected twists her life often took. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The journey to Chicago was a blur of buses, trains, and walking, always moving, always watching. She adopted a new persona with each leg of the trip. A weary traveler, a lost tourist, a student buried in a book. Her appearance was unremarkable, her gaze distant, her movements fluid and unhurried. She blended into the background noise of America, another face in the crowd. Reaching the park, she found the oak tree exactly as she remembered it, its ancient branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. The digging was slow, painstaking work, done under the cover of a moonless night, her heart hammering against her ribs with a mixture of fear and grim satisfaction. When her fingers finally closed around the familiar cold metal, a surge of triumph, sharp and intoxicating, coursed through her. Inside, nestled amongst faded photographs and a worn compass, were a few $1,000s in crisp $100 bills. It was enough. With her initial funds secured, Jessica began to build her new existence piece by piece. Her first purchase was a burner phone, paid for in cash at a nondescript convenience store miles from the park. Next, a cheap prepaid data plan. She avoided public Wi-Fi, using the phone sparingly, only when absolutely necessary, and always with a VPN. She bought a new wardrobe from thrift stores in different towns, choosing clothes that were practical, unassuming, and completely different from her previous styles. She dyed her hair a dull brown, cut it herself with a cheap pair of scissors, and started wearing glasses with plain frames, subtly altering the contours of her face. She changed her walk, her posture, even the way she held her shoulders. She was no longer Jessica Hayes, nor was she Sarah Miller. She was nobody, and nobody was dangerous. Her next step was information. She needed to understand how the system worked, who had access to her files, who could have known her location. She couldn't hack into government databases, that was a fantasy. Her approach had to be more subtle, more human. She needed to exploit the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, the petty grievances of those who worked within the very program designed to protect her. She started by observing. For weeks, she haunted the periphery of federal buildings, government offices, and the coffee shops and bars where bureaucrats unwound. She listened, watched, and learned the rhythms of their lives. She noticed patterns. The same security guard always taking a smoke break at 3:17 p.m., the administrative assistant who always ordered the same complicated latte, the mid-level agent who consistently spent his lunch breaks on his phone, scrolling through sports scores. She was a ghost in their peripheral vision, a flicker they never registered. Her target wasn't the mole directly. That would be like trying to catch a shadow. Her target was the network, the interconnected web of people and information that the mole had exploited. She needed to find the loose threads, the frayed edges. One afternoon, nursing a lukewarm coffee in a cafe across the street from a regional Department of Justice office, she noticed a man. He was in his late 40s, balding, with a perpetually furrowed brow and an expensive, ill-fitting suit. He wasn't remarkable, but what caught her eye was his routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, precisely at 11:45 a.m., he met another man, younger, sharper, in a dark sedan with tinted windows. The younger man would hand him a small, unmarked envelope. The older man would glance inside, his brow furrowing deeper, before quickly slipping it into his inner jacket pocket. The exchange lasted no more than 90 seconds. No words were ever exchanged. This wasn't an official meeting. The older man, whom Jessica had observed entering and exiting the DOJ building, was a mid-level analyst named David Chun, someone with access to various program files, though not necessarily top-secret clearance. The younger man was an enigma. He always wore the same tailored black suit, his face obscured by the tinted windows of the sedan, or by the angle of his exit from the car. Jessica's gut churned with a familiar mix of caution and exhilaration. This was it. A lead. A potential crack in the wall. The envelopes were too discreet, the exchange too practiced, the players too careful. This smelled of illicit information, of a side hustle, of something worth investigating. She began to follow David Chun. It was a dangerous game, requiring an almost supernatural level of stealth. She used public transport, always keeping multiple escape routes in mind. She learned his habits, his preferred brand of instant coffee, the route he took to the subway, the obscure diner where he ate lunch alone, silently reading a worn paperback. She noted his subtle tells, the nervous habit of tugging at his ear when stressed, the slight tremor in his hand when he paid for his coffee. He was a creature of habit, a man bogged down by routine, and routine Jessica knew was a vulnerability. One evening, she followed him to a dingy bar in a less than reputable part of town. He walked in, ordered a whiskey, and sat at a secluded booth in the back. Jessica slipped in unnoticed a few minutes later, taking a stool at the bar, her back to the wall, her eyes scanning the room. Chun was meeting someone. A woman. She was striking with sharp features and an icy demeanor, dressed in a sleek dark business suit. She held herself with an air of authority, an aura that spoke of power and ruthlessness. Jessica's instincts screamed danger. This woman was not a casual acquaintance. Their conversation was low, hushed, but Jessica, positioned strategically, focused her hearing, picking up fragments over the din of the bar. David Chun was visibly agitated, his ear-tugging habit in full swing. He was arguing with the woman, his voice barely above a whisper. "The parameters have changed, Eleanor," Chun muttered, his voice laced with fear. "This wasn't part of the deal. I can't keep pulling information like this. It's too risky." Eleanor. The name resonated with a chilling familiarity. Jessica had heard it before, a passing mention in a file sheet glimpsed during her brief, ill-fated stint in witness protection. Eleanor Vance, a high-ranking official within the DOJ, known for her ambition and her iron-fisted control over her subordinates. A woman with immense power and potentially the means to access almost anything. "The deal stands, David," Eleanor responded, her voice a low, dangerous purr that cut through the bar's noise. "You have obligations, and I have ways of reminding you of them. The parameters are whatever I say they are. You find what I need or your gambling debts become public knowledge, along with a few other indiscretions." Her gaze was cold, unwavering. Jessica felt a jolt. Gambling debts? Indiscretions? This was the leverage. This was the opening. Chun was being blackmailed. He wasn't the mole, not directly, but he was a link in the chain. And Eleanor Vance, a high-ranking official, was clearly pulling the strings. Chun swallowed hard, his face pale. What about the missing witness? Sarah Miller? They're tearing the program apart looking for her. They're going to find the leak, Eleanor. They're going to find us. Eleanor gave a dismissive wave of her hand. Let them. They'll be looking in the wrong places. Your job is to make sure of that, and to provide me with the access codes to the old Ghost Files database. The ones from before the system update. That's your next assignment. Ghost Files. The term sent a shiver down Jessica's spine. Those were the files on witnesses whose original identities were so deeply buried, so thoroughly erased, that they existed only as phantoms within the system. Files that contained the most sensitive, most protected information. Her information. Eleanor Vance wanted access to the Ghost Files. Why? And for whom? The pieces were beginning to fall into place, forming a terrifying mosaic of betrayal. Eleanor Vance wasn't just a blackmailer. She was orchestrating something far larger, far more sinister. She was either the mole herself or she was working for the mole, a powerful player pulling strings from within the very heart of the system. Jessica slipped out of the bar as quietly as she had entered, her mind reeling. The air outside was cold, but a burning inferno raged within her. She had a name, Eleanor Vance, and she had a target, David Chun. He was the weak link, the terrified subordinate caught in a web of his own making. He would be her entry point. He would lead her to Eleanor, and Eleanor would lead her to the truth. The game was no longer just about survival or vengeance. It was about dismantling the entire structure that had sought to erase her, then destroy her. And she knew exactly where to begin. The starting point wasn't a place on a map, but a name etched in her memory, a ghost of a past she'd fought so hard to bury. Agent Michael Evans. He was the one who'd first approached her, his calm demeanor and earnest eyes convincing her that the witness protection program was her only salvation. He was the last person she trusted blindly, before her world fractured into a million pieces of deceit, before the very system meant to protect her turned into a sophisticated, insidious trap. Michael wasn't involved in the later betrayal, she was certain. He was just a cog, perhaps a faithful servant of a legitimate system, but a cog connected to the original untainted machinery. If anyone could point her to the legitimate entry points, to the old records, to how the system really worked before it was subverted, it would be him. Finding Michael wouldn't be easy. The program erased people, not just witnesses, but sometimes even its own, especially those who retired with too much institutional knowledge. But she knew how to find ghosts. She began with the most basic yet often overlooked digital crumbs: public records, professional networking sites that might list retired government personnel, obscure government directories that weren't meant for public consumption, but existed in the deeper layers of the internet, accessible to those with enough skill and patience. It was a tedious, painstaking process, hours blurring into days as she navigated firewalls and encrypted databases from a series of anonymous networks, shifting locations constantly, always aware that every digital footprint was a potential breadcrumb for those hunting her. She found him, not in an official capacity, not in the gilded halls of justice she remembered, but retired, living a quiet life in a small, unassuming town in upstate New York, far from the shadows and the sirens and the constant hum of federal surveillance. Michael Evans, now a grandfather, his hair silvered, his face lined with the comfortable creases of a life lived away from the edge, volunteering at a local community center, teaching chess to kids. The irony wasn't lost on her. He'd put her into a program meant to protect, only for it to become her prison, and now he was living a life of peaceful anonymity, a life she'd been denied, stolen from her, then almost ended. She watched him for days, not from a vantage point across the street, but from a calculated distance, observing his patterns, his habits, looking for any sign that he was still connected, still under surveillance, still a part of the world she was trying to dismantle. There were none. He was truly out, truly disconnected. This was good. It meant he was a free variable, unburdened by the corrupt system, but it also meant he might be a harder nut to crack. He had nothing to gain and potentially everything to lose by helping her. He was a man who had chosen peace, and she was about to drag him back into the war. The approach had to be precise, non-threatening, but firm. She waited until he was alone, walking home from the community center, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves, the golden hour painting long shadows across the quiet suburban street. She stepped out from behind a stand of old oak trees, her voice low, carefully modulated, designed to cut through the quiet with a jolt of recognition, yet not alarm. "Agent Evans," she said, letting the title hang in the air. A ghost from his past, a whisper of a life he tried to leave behind. He stopped, his shoulders tensing, his hand instinctively reaching for an invisible holster at his hip. Old habits, ingrained reflexes died hard. He turned slowly, his eyes, though softened by age, still sharp, assessing, wary. He didn't recognize her immediately. Her face, her hair, even her posture were different. She was a phantom, a whisper of a memory, a nightmare given flesh. "I don't know you," he said, his voice even controlled, betraying nothing. "You knew me once," she replied, a hint of steel in her tone, a thread of the woman she truly was now, stripped bare and forged in fire. "Under a different name, a different life, a life you helped me escape." A flicker of understanding, then dawning horror crossed his face. His eyes widened, searching her features, piecing together the fragmented information, the impossible truth standing before him. "No," he whispered, a tremor in his voice, his composure finally cracking. "That's impossible. You were gone. The file was closed. You were confirmed gone." "The file was closed by those who wanted me silenced," she corrected, stepping closer, maintaining a respectful distance, aware of the delicate balance of fear and trust she was trying to establish. "But I'm not silenced. And I'm not gone. I survived. And now I need your help, Michael." He looked around, his gaze darting nervously, assessing the quiet street, the distant houses. "This isn't safe. For either of us. If you're really who I think you are, then you know what kind of people we're talking about. The reach they have." "I know exactly what kind of people," she affirmed, her gaze unwavering, meeting his fear with her own hardened resolve. "And I know they tried to kill me. Multiple times. I'm beyond safe, Michael. I'm beyond fear. All I have left is the truth, and I intend to find it, no matter the cost. And I believe you are the key to unlocking the first door." He hesitated, his internal struggle visible in the clenching of his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands. He was a good man, she sensed it. A man who believed in the ideals of justice, even if the system he served had been corrupted, even if it had broken him. "Walk with me," he finally said, his voice low, almost a plea, turning and continuing his slow, deliberate pace towards his home, towards the sanctuary of his quiet life. "Don't attract attention. Don't speak another word until we're inside." They walked in silence for a few blocks, the only sound the rustling of leaves beneath their feet, the distant bark of a dog, the mundane sounds of a world she had been violently expelled from. The tension between them was a palpable third presence. Once inside his modest, comfortable home, filled with framed photos of smiling children and grandchildren, he led her to a small private study. He closed the door, blocking out the light and the world, then turned to face her, his expression grim. "What do you want?" he asked again, his voice barely audible, the weight of his past pressing down on him. "I want to know about Eleanor," she stated plainly, cutting to the chase. "And the subprogram she was running. The one that was cleaning up loose ends. The one that targeted me. The one that failed to finish the job." He flinched visibly at the name as if struck. Eleanor, she was a legend. Brilliant, ruthless. She rose through the ranks too fast for anyone to question. Too many people owed her favors, feared her. But a subprogram? I was out long before anything like that could have solidified, could have been given a designation. "But you were in when the seeds were planted," she countered gently, pressing her advantage. "You saw the early signs. The shifts in protocol, the unusual transfers, the cases that just disappeared from the legitimate system's radar. My case, Michael. It was one of them, wasn't it? An anomaly that you couldn't quite reconcile." He sighed, a heavy, world-weary sound that spoke of decades of compromise and disillusionment. He sank into a worn leather armchair. "Your case was unusual, yes. You were a high-value asset, but the information you had, it was too sensitive. It implicated too many powerful people, not just criminals, but people inside the system itself. People with badges and positions of authority. That's why you were fast-tracked, handled with such extreme secrecy. And then you just vanished from the system. Not officially, not a death certificate, but a complete erasure. It raised red flags for some of us, but no one dared to ask too many questions. Eleanor had a way of making questions disappear, of making people disappear if they asked too many. I didn't just vanish," she pressed, her voice gaining a hard edge. "I was moved to a secure facility, supposedly. A black site off-book, off-grid. But it was a trap. A waiting game until they decided I was too much of a risk to keep alive. A liability to be disposed of." He looked away, his gaze fixed on a framed photograph of his wife. His eyes held a deep sadness, a regret that seemed to have settled deep in his bones. "I believe you. I always suspected something was rotten at the core, something festering. But I was old, tired. I saw too many good people get swallowed by the ambition of others, by the lure of power. I just wanted out. To live a quiet life before the rot consumed me too." "I understand," she said, her voice softer now, acknowledging his pain. "But now, I need you to remember. Anything. Any detail about Eleanor's operations, her contacts, her methods. Any old physical files that might have been overlooked in the digital purge. Any back channels she used, any peculiar habits she had." He closed his eyes, concentrating, sifting through the dust of old memories. Eleanor had a team. A very small, very loyal team. They operated almost entirely off-book, outside of any official oversight. Their primary function, from what I gathered through whispers and hushed conversations, was asset management for the most sensitive cases. But management sometimes meant disposal, meant permanent, irreversible solutions. "How do I find them?" "You don't," he said sharply, opening his eyes, a flash of fear in them. "They're ghosts. Better than ghosts. They're people who never existed, not in any official capacity. Their records were purged, their identities scrubbed clean, their lives fabricated from whole cloth." Eleanor was a master at that. She built her own shadow network within the program, using resources no one ever questioned because she had the backing of someone even higher up, someone truly untouchable, someone who could override any challenge. This was new. Someone higher up? Who? He shook his head slowly, regretfully. "I never knew. No one did, not really. It was always referred to as the benefactor in hushed tones, in cautious whispers behind closed doors. The one who gave Eleanor free rein, who shielded her from oversight, who supplied her with unlimited resources. Eleanor was just the visible tip of a very deep, very dark iceberg, a puppet master pulling her strings. So if I can't find her team and I don't know who the benefactor is, how do I find Eleanor?" she asked, her frustration mounting, a desperate edge in her voice. He pushed himself up from the armchair, walked to a bookshelf, and ran a hand over the spines of old books. Eleanor had a weakness. A blind spot. She was meticulous, almost pathologically so, but she believed in her own invincibility, her own genius. She often kept physical records of her most important assets, the ones she controlled, the ones she eliminated, in a place she thought was utterly secure. A kind of trophy room almost, a testament to her power, her control over life and death. Where? The single word was a demand, a desperate plea for a concrete lead. He turned, his eyes holding a glimmer of something akin to hope, or perhaps just a desire for atonement. There was an old Federal Records Annex, decommissioned, supposedly empty for decades, just outside of Richmond, Virginia. It was a relic forgotten by most, deemed structurally unsound and too costly to renovate. But Eleanor, she liked the irony of hiding her deepest secrets in plain sight, in a place no one would ever think to look. A place too obvious to be a secret, too abandoned to be important. Richmond, Virginia. A specific location. This was it. This was the lead she needed, the first tangible step towards the heart of the conspiracy. How do I get in? It's not guarded, not officially, not by government personnel, he explained, his mind clearly sifting through old blueprints and security protocols. But it would be wired, certainly. Alarms, motion sensors, pressure plates. And if Eleanor used it, it would have her personal touch. Biometric locks, probably tied to her unique identifiers. She was obsessed with security, with compartmentalization. And if I get in, what am I looking for? Her ledger, he said, his voice low and firm, a grim determination replacing the weariness. She kept a physical ledger, black leather bound, probably with a reinforced clasp. She called it the register. It contained every name, every operation, every asset she managed, every life she controlled or ended. It was her legacy. And your name under your original identity would be in there, marked for disposition. The thought sent a chill down her spine, but also a surge of fierce, burning resolve. Her real name, the one they tried to erase. The register was not just a list, it was proof. Proof of her existence, proof of their crimes, proof that she was not just a casualty but a survivor. Thank you, Michael, she said, rising, feeling the weight of the information, the magnitude of the task ahead. You've given me more than hope. You've given me a target. A way in. He reached out, grasping her arm briefly, his touch surprisingly strong. Be careful. If you find that ledger, you'll be holding the entire rotten structure in your hands. And they will stop at nothing to get it back, to silence you permanently. You won't just be a loose end anymore. You'll be a declaration of war. And they will respond with everything they have. She met his gaze, a steely resolve in her eyes, a flicker of something dangerous and unbreakable. Good, she whispered, her voice barely audible, a promise to herself and to the ghosts of those they had silenced. Because that's exactly what I intend to declare. As she slipped back into the encroaching twilight, leaving Michael Evans on his porch, a profound shift occurred within her. The mission had coalesced, sharpened into a deadly point. No longer was it just about surviving or even just about Eleanor. It was about exposing the benefactor, dismantling the entire shadow organization festering within the Witness Protection Program, and laying bare their dark secrets for the world to see. The Richmond Annex was the first step into the heart of that darkness. She would find the register, and then she would burn their world down. The game was truly on, and she was no longer just a pawn. She was the one moving the pieces, and the first piece was already in motion, heading south, towards the Forgotten Records Annex in Richmond, Virginia, where Eleanor's dark secrets lay waiting to be unearthed. The hum of the highway became a distant memory as Jessica's rental car ate up the miles, the setting sun painting streaks of orange and purple across the Virginia sky. Her mind, however, was already deep within the labyrinth of federal archives, picturing the dusty files and forgotten secrets that awaited her. She drove with a singular purpose, the image of Eleanor Vance's smug face a constant, unwelcome companion in her rearview mirror. The sense of urgency that had propelled her from her quiet life now felt like a living entity, a relentless drumbeat in her chest. Richmond, Virginia, was a city steeped in history, but Jessica wasn't interested in monuments or museums. Her destination was a nondescript, brutalist building on the outskirts, a place designed for anonymity, the Federal Records Annex. It was late when she arrived, the building mostly dark save for a few security lights casting long, eerie shadows. She knew the public access hours were long over, but she wasn't planning on waiting. fishing out her old, laminated FBI identification card. A relic from a life she thought she'd left behind, slightly altered for her current, unofficial mission. She approached the security desk. A tired-looking guard, a man named Gary with a drooping mustache, eyed her with suspicion. "Can I help you, ma'am? We're closed." Jessica's voice was firm, authoritative, a tone she hadn't used in years. "Special Agent Jessica Riley, Department of Justice. I have an urgent, time-sensitive request for archived materials. I've been authorized for after-hours access. There should be a notification." She pushed the ID across the counter, making sure he focused on the official seals, not the slightly faded photo. Gary squinted at the card, then at a computer screen slowly typing. Jessica held her breath, prepared for a challenge, prepared to bluff her way through. But after a moment he grunted. "Huh, looks like a late approval came through. Ms. Henderson in Archives will be expecting you for a retrieval. Take the elevator to the 3rd floor, past the restricted section. She's waiting." A small flicker of relief, quickly extinguished by the knowledge that she was now operating entirely without a safety net, passed through her. She nodded curtly, retrieved her ID, and made her way to the elevator. The ride up was slow, the ancient machinery groaning under the strain, each floor a new layer of silence descending upon her. The 3rd floor was a maze of dimly lit corridors, smelling faintly of old paper and dust. A single light spilled from an open door at the far end. Inside, a woman with tight gray hair and severe glasses, Martha Henderson, sat hunched over a desk, a formidable stack of files before her. She didn't look up immediately. "Agent Riley, I presume?" Martha's voice was dry, devoid of warmth. "Your request came through rather last minute. What exactly are you looking for at this hour?" "Eleanor Vance," Jessica stated, cutting straight to the chase. "Her complete WITSEC file. And any cross-referenced materials. Everything you have on her, from her initial intake to her last known status update." Martha raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Eleanor Vance. That name rings a bell. A rather complicated case, if I recall. You understand federal protocol, Agent. Some of these files are heavily redacted, and access to certain internal documents is restricted." "I understand," Jessica replied, her gaze unwavering. "I have clearance for full access to all materials pertaining to this subject. If there are any issues, you can contact my supervisor, Assistant Director Michael Chun. His number is on my ID." She knew Michael Chun was retired, living a quiet life in Florida, but the name still carried weight. It was a calculated risk. Martha sighed, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Very well. It's going to take some time. These are deep archives. Some of her earlier files are in the physical stacks, not digitized. You're welcome to wait in the main retrieval area." The main retrieval area was a cavernous room filled with rows upon rows of metal shelves, each one overflowing with manila folders, bound volumes, and faded boxes. The air was thick with the scent of decaying paper and the chill of climate control. It was a place where stories went to die or perhaps to be reborn. Hours bled into one another. Martha, surprisingly efficient, began to wheel out carts laden with files. Jessica meticulously sifted through them, her eyes scanning for anomalies, for anything that didn't quite fit. She found the standard WITSEC intake forms, the relocation manifests, the new identities, the financial allocations. It was all by the book, dull and utterly unrevealing. But then, tucked away in a subfolder labeled Prior Engagements Unresolved, within Eleanor Vance's main WITSEC jacket, Jessica found a single thin file. It was older, its paper brittle, distinct from the newer crisp documents. The title was simply, Case File July 11, 2002, Project Chimera. Project Chimera. The name sent a shiver down Jessica's spine. It sounded like something out of a spy novel, not a routine federal investigation. She opened it carefully. Inside, the documents were sparse, almost skeletal. It detailed a brief, ill-fated federal investigation into a sophisticated international financial fraud scheme that had collapsed a series of small regional banks almost 2 decades ago. Eleanor Vance was listed, not as a victim, but as a cooperating informant. What struck Jessica immediately was the date. This investigation predated Eleanor's official entry into WITSEC by several years. And more importantly, the case had been mysteriously closed, deemed unpursuable due to lack of actionable intelligence, despite the significant financial damage and the clear evidence of a large-scale conspiracy. Eleanor Vance, the cooperating informant, had seemingly vanished from the record after the case closure, only to resurface years later as a key witness in a completely different, unrelated federal prosecution, the one that put her into WITSEC. Jessica's fingers trembled slightly as she turned the last page of the Project Chimera file. There, scrawled in faded blue ink in the margin, was a handwritten notation. CDOJ Internal Review, FI 2000 New Arthur Hayes. Arthur Hayes. The name hit her like a physical blow. Arthur Hayes wasn't just some forgotten bureaucrat. He was a titan in the Department of Justice, a former Deputy Attorney General, known for his ruthless efficiency and his meteoric rise through the ranks. He had retired only a few years ago, lauded as a hero of federal law enforcement, but his influence still lingered, a shadow over Washington. He was the man responsible for signing off on countless high-profile investigations, and, more notoriously, for discreetly burying others. Jessica's mind raced. Arthur Hayes, a powerful figure, had overseen the internal review that closed Project Chimera, an investigation where Eleanor Vance was an informant. Years later, the same Arthur Hayes, now a deputy AG, would have been in a prime position to approve, or at the very least influence, Eleanor Vance's expedited entry into the Witness Protection Program. The coincidence was too grand, too deliberate to be accidental. This wasn't just about Eleanor Vance being a bad witness or a manipulator. This was about something far bigger, something deeply entrenched within the system itself. Project Chimera, an unpursued financial fraud, an informant who vanished and then reappeared, protected by the very man who had overseen the closure of her first case. It painted a picture of a carefully constructed narrative, a hidden agenda that stretched back years. Eleanor Vance wasn't just hiding from a cartel. She was potentially complicit in something far more insidious, and Arthur Hayes, the supposed pillar of justice, was somehow intertwined. He hadn't just approved her WITSEC placement. He had managed her, perhaps even controlled her, for reasons unknown. The air in the archive suddenly felt colder, heavier. Jessica looked around at the silent rows of files, each one a potential repository of another buried truth. She had come looking for answers about a failed WITSEC placement, and she had stumbled upon a thread leading directly into the highest echelons of federal power. The realization was chilling. She was no longer just chasing Eleanor Vance. She was now on the trail of Arthur Hayes, a man whose reach was vast, whose secrets were undoubtedly lethal. Her phone buzzed, a stark intrusion into the quiet. It was an unknown number. Her gut instinct screamed danger, but her curiosity, now sharpened to a razor's edge, compelled her to answer. She lifted the phone to her ear, her eyes still fixed on the name Arthur Hayes, scrawled on the old file. A silent promise to herself that she would unravel this dark tapestry, no matter the cost. The dial tone hummed, a flat, mechanical sound that did little to calm the agitated rhythm of her heart. She took a deep breath, the scent of old paper and stale coffee filling her nostrils, grounding her just enough to focus. The number she dialed was an old one, committed to memory from years ago, belonging to a man named Mark Peterson. He was a retired FBI agent, a mentor from her early days, known for his encyclopedic memory and his uncanny ability to find information that others swore didn't exist. More importantly, he was one of the few people she still entirely trusted, a man who operated by his own strict moral code, untouched by the bureaucratic rot she now suspected permeated her own agency. The phone rang twice, 3 times. Each ring stretched time, amplifying the silence in her small, cluttered office. She imagined Mark, probably in his garden, or tinkering with one of his antique radios, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. On the 4th ring, a gruff, slightly raspy voice answered. "Peterson. Mark? It's Jessica Miles." A beat of silence on the other end, long enough for her to picture his brow furrowing in surprise. "Jess? Well, I'll be. It's been a while, kiddo. Everything all right? You usually only call when you've got a case that's tied itself in knots." The casual tone was a welcome balm, but she couldn't allow herself to relax. "It's complicated, Mark. More than knots. It's a whole damn Gordian knot. And I think someone's trying to cut off my hands before I can even find a sword." Mark's voice sharpened instantly. "That bad, huh? You sound like you're talking through a wiretap. Are you?" "No, I don't think so. Not yet. But I need your help. Off the books. Completely." Another pause, heavier this time. Mark knew what off the books meant from her. It meant danger, secrets, and a direct challenge to the system. All right, Jess. What do you need? I'm looking into a name. Arthur Hayes. Ring any bells? I'm trying to find out if he was ever in WITSEC, or if there's any record of his involvement with federal protection, any kind of classified status. Arthur Hayes, Mark repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. Doesn't immediately jump out at me. Lots of Hayes in the world, Jess. What's the context? He's on a list of people who were supposedly under protection, who then died under questionable circumstances. His file is practically wiped clean from official channels. It's like he never existed. But I found his name scrawled on an old unofficial ledger. Wiped clean, you say? Mark's voice was low, thoughtful. That's not just questionable, Jess. That's a 5-alarm fire. You know what that implies? I do, she confirmed, her grip tightening on the phone. It implies someone wants him forgotten. And I want to know why. All right, give me what you've got. Any dates? Locations? Last known anything? Not much. The ledger just has his name and a vague reference to a relocation in the late 90s, early 2000s, and a handwritten note next to his name. Code Red. I have no idea what that means. Code Red, Mark mused. That's unusual. Not standard protocol. Sounds like an internal designation, not something for official records. Could mean extreme threat, high-value target, or a critical security breach. Or all three. He sighed, a weary sound. This isn't going to be easy, Jess. If official channels are scrubbed, then someone went to a lot of trouble. And they won't appreciate you digging it up. I know, she said, her voice firm. But I have to. Too many names on that list, Mark. Too many coincidences. I think the program isn't just failing. I think it's being compromised. Compromised by whom? He asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. That's what I'm trying to figure out. But if Arthur Hayes was involved in something big enough to warrant a code red, and then disappear, he might be the key. All right, Jess. I'll see what I can dredge up. It'll take some time. My old contacts are mostly retired or dead, and the younger ones, well, they're not as trusting as they used to be, especially when you're asking about ghosts. Be careful, Mark. Don't put yourself at risk. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Risk is my middle name, kiddo. Just try not to get yourself killed before I can give you something solid. I'll call you back on this number, but don't expect it soon. And don't call me unless it's an emergency. Assume eyes and ears are everywhere now. Understood. Thank you, Mark. Truly. Don't thank me yet. Just find the truth. He hung up, leaving her with the persistent hum of the dial tone before it clicked off. Jessica slowly lowered the phone, her mind racing. Mark's words echoed. Code red. Compromised. Eyes and ears are everywhere. The weight of it pressed down on her, a physical burden. She looked around her office, suddenly feeling exposed. The window, usually a source of comfort with its view of the city, now felt like a gaping aperture, inviting unseen gazes. Was someone watching her now? Had they known she'd make this call? She pushed the paranoia down, knowing it was a weapon the enemy would use against her. She needed to be sharp, focused. While Mark was digging, she had to continue her own independent investigation. Using what little access she still had, she pulled out the old ledger again, tracing the names with her finger. Each one a life, a story now reduced to a line of faded ink and a mysterious early end. Arthur Hayes. What was so special about him? What secret did he carry that made him a code red witness? She remembered the peculiar way his file had been classified, the layers of obfuscation. It wasn't just missing. It was deliberately hidden, woven into a pattern of misdirection. Her thoughts drifted back to the initial cases, the first few unfortunate accidents that had piqued her interest. The construction worker who fell from scaffolding, the heart attack victim in a quiet suburb, the boating accident. All seemingly unrelated, all confirmed by local authorities, closed cases. But now, with Arthur Hayes and the Code Red designation, she saw them not as separate incidents, but as pieces of a larger mosaic, a chilling picture of calculated elimination. She spent the next few hours meticulously reviewing the fragmented data she had on the other names on the list, searching for any common threads, any subtle anomalies. Was there a specific type of witness being targeted? Were they all connected to the same criminal organization, or perhaps to something even larger, something political? The more she looked, the more she felt like she was sifting through sand, searching for a single grain of gold. The information was too sparse, too fragmented, intentionally so. As evening approached, the office emptied, leaving her in a pool of dim overhead light. The silence grew heavier, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city. Her phone vibrated on the desk, startling her. She snatched it up, her heart leaping. It was an unknown number. Her hand trembled slightly as she answered. "Hello." A whisper, barely audible, crackled through the line. "Jessica Miles?" Her blood ran cold. The voice was distorted, electronically altered, making it impossible to identify. "Who is this?" she demanded, trying to keep her own voice steady. "You're digging where you shouldn't be, Marshall. Some things are best left buried." The voice held a chilling, calm menace. "Is that a threat?" A low, guttural laugh. "Consider it a friendly warning. You keep pulling at these threads, and you might unravel more than you can handle. And when that happens, there won't be anyone left to pick up the pieces." "Who are you working for?" she pressed, her mind racing, trying to pinpoint the source of the call, to gather any clue. "It doesn't matter who we are. What matters is what you do next. Walk away, Marshall. Forget about Arthur Hayes. Forget about the others. Go back to your desk, push paper, and live a long, boring life. Or don't." The line went dead. Jessica stared at the phone, her hand still clutching it tightly. The blood pounded in her ears. They knew she was digging. They knew about Arthur Hayes. Mark's warning echoed with terrifying clarity. Assume eyes and ears are everywhere now. This wasn't just a threat. It was confirmation. Confirmation that the conspiracy was real, that it was active, and that it had eyes inside watching her every move. The urgency to find answers, to expose the truth, intensified tenfold. But so did the fear. She was no longer just investigating. She was being hunted. She thought of the names on her list, the code red next to Arthur Hayes. If his case was so critical, if he knew something so dangerous that they had to erase him and then silence anyone who looked for him, then what was it? What was the secret that had cost so many lives, and now threatened hers? The chilling call, far from deterring her, had only galvanized her resolve. The voice on the phone had offered her a choice. Walk away and live, or continue and face the unknown. But Jessica had never been one to walk away from injustice. Her promise to herself, fixed on Arthur Hayes' name, solidified into an unshakable oath. She would unravel this dark tapestry, no matter the cost. The game had just changed. It was no longer a quiet investigation. It was a desperate race against an unseen enemy, for her life and for the truth. The name solidified into an unshakable oath. She would unravel this dark tapestry, no matter the cost. The game had just changed. It was no longer a quiet investigation. It was a desperate race against an unseen enemy, for her life and for the truth. A cold dread, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, pierced through Jessica. Her identity, compromised. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. How? Who? The question screamed in her mind, a chaotic symphony of fear and betrayal. Every detail of her life and witness protection, meticulously crafted and guarded, had been breached. And if hers was compromised, then David Miller's years ago must have been too. He hadn't just failed the program, he had been betrayed by it. The thought was a bitter metallic taste on her tongue. She moved not with panic but with a chilling, almost robotic efficiency. Years of training, of drills for worst-case scenarios kicked in. Her apartment, her sanctuary, was now a trap. She had minutes, maybe less. She grabbed the small, worn backpack she always kept packed for emergencies. A change of clothes, a burner phone, a prepaid credit card, a handful of cash. No electronics that could be traced. Her official agency phone, her laptop, even her smartwatch, all left behind, their digital footprints severed. She wiped down every surface she might have touched. A frantic dance against an invisible clock. DNA, fingerprints, anything that could link her to this place had to vanish. She even took the time to disable the apartment's smart lock, forcing it to its manual setting, a small, futile act of defiance against the digital net closing around her. As she slipped out the back door, melting into the pre-dawn shadows of the alley, she felt the phantom touch of eyes on her back. The city, usually a comforting blanket of anonymity, now felt like a vast, open maw, ready to swallow her whole. Her first priority was to vanish. She couldn't use public transport, couldn't hail a cab. Any digital transaction, any recorded movement would be a breadcrumb. She walked miles through the labyrinthine backstreets, her senses heightened, every rustle of leaves, every distant siren a potential threat. She blended with the early morning joggers, the first commuters, a ghost in the urban landscape. She changed clothes in a deserted park restroom, discarding her old ones in a public bin miles from her starting point. She bought a cheap, disposable phone from a convenience store with cash, its only purpose to make a single, crucial call, then be discarded. The call was to a secure, encrypted line she knew belonged to a former mentor, Agent Robert Maxwell. He was retired, off-grid himself, and one of the few people she trusted implicitly, even if their relationship had soured slightly after her decision to join witness protection. The line rang twice, then a gruff, familiar voice answered. "Maxwell," he said, no pleasantries. "It's Jessica," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "They know. My cover's blown. I think it's internal." A beat of silence, heavy with unspoken understanding. Robert had always been skeptical of the program's absolute security. "How bad?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "Bad enough that I'm running. David Miller. His case. It wasn't a failure, Robert. It was a setup. I think someone sold him out, and now they're coming for me because I got too close. Where are you? Doesn't matter. I can't stay on this line. I need you to do something for me. You remember the Miller file? The original one, before the redactions, before the sanitized version." "Vaguely. A mess. High-profile target, powerful connections." "Why?" "I need you to dig. Find anything that seemed off. A name, a date, an unusual transfer, anything that points to a leak. Specifically, look at the initial debriefings, the internal communications around his placement. Who had access? Who signed off on everything?" Her voice was a desperate plea. "And Robert, trust no one. Not even the director. Especially not the director. I'll make contact when I can." She hung up, pulled the battery, and crushed the phone under her heel, dropping the pieces into a storm drain. Her last connection to any semblance of official help was severed. She was truly alone. Now her mind raced back to David Miller. Everything she'd learned about his case had to be re-evaluated through the lens of betrayal. He was a low-level accountant for a powerful, shadowy financial conglomerate, Omnicorp, run by a man named Arthur Sterling. David had stumbled upon evidence of massive money laundering, international fraud, and perhaps even darker dealings. He'd gone to the authorities, risking everything, believing in the system. But the system, it seemed, had failed him spectacularly. What had she missed? She replayed every detail of David's original testimony, his psychological evaluations, the reports of his subsequent erratic behavior in protection. Erratic behavior, or the desperate acts of a man realizing he was hunted from within. The official story painted him as paranoid, unstable, a liability who couldn't adhere to the rules. But what if his paranoia was justified? What if his unstable behavior was him trying to warn someone, anyone, that he was exposed? She remembered a specific detail from his file. A coded message David had tried to send to his sister, Emily, before he disappeared. It was dismissed as a symptom of his delusion, a jumbled series of numbers and letters. The message had read, 711RDP3A. At the time it meant nothing. It was just another piece of evidence of his mental decline. But now, with the chilling certainty that he was betrayed, a new possibility flickered. What if it wasn't random? What if it was a key? She had dismissed it because it didn't fit the narrative. But what if David, a meticulous accountant, a man who dealt in precise figures, was trying to communicate something vital? She had to remember the context. The message was found scribbled on a napkin in his first safe house, shortly before he was moved to a second one, the very move that preceded his disappearance. He was trying to reach Emily, a woman he trusted implicitly. The letters and numbers swam in her mind. 7 to 11. A convenience store? A date? RDP. Remote desktop protocol? A computer term. 3A. An apartment number? A code? It felt too specific to be random, too structured to be a complete delusion. David Miller, the man who had meticulously documented Omnicorp's illicit dealings, would not leave a meaningless message. He would leave a trail. Her thoughts spiraled. If Omnicorp was powerful enough to infiltrate the witness protection program, then Arthur Sterling's reach was far beyond what anyone had imagined. This wasn't just about a corrupt corporation. It was about a cancer at the heart of the justice system itself. The very people sworn to protect witnesses were the ones selling them out. She needed a quiet place, somewhere she could think, somewhere she could access information without leaving a digital trace. A public library, perhaps, with its old computers and anonymity. She had a few hours before the city truly woke up, before the manhunt for her began in earnest. As she walked, the city lights beginning to brighten the horizon, she spotted a nondescript black sedan, parked conspicuously on a side street, its engine idling. Two men in dark suits sat inside, their faces obscured by the tinted windows. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They hadn't found her yet, but they were looking. They were close. The feeling of being hunted sharpened her focus, turning her fear into a cold, hard resolve. She needed to understand that message. 711 RDP3A. It was her only lead, her only hope of understanding what David knew, and perhaps, her only way to expose the truth before she became another forgotten casualty of a failed program. The implications were staggering, the danger immense. But the oath she had made, to David Miller, to Emily, to herself, burned brighter than any fear. She would find out what RDP stood for, and she would find out who was behind this. The oath she had made, to David Miller, to Emily, to herself, burned brighter than any fear. She would find out what RDP stood for, and she would find out who was behind this. She moved with a renewed, cold precision. The world outside her small, isolated cabin seemed to hum with a dangerous energy, but inside, her focus narrowed to a laser point. RDP, a three-letter acronym, a silent killer, the key to unlocking the entire horrifying truth. She knew she couldn't trust anyone in an official capacity. The system itself was compromised, a rotten core at its heart. Her mind raced, sifting through old contacts, past assignments, and the labyrinthine structure of government agencies. Who would know something, anything, about an unsanctioned protocol operating in the shadows? Who could she trust, even marginally, who wasn't already a target or a participant? One name surfaced: Frank Peterson, a grizzled, brilliant data analyst she'd worked with years ago on a highly sensitive, deeply classified project. Frank had always operated on the fringes, a digital archivist with an uncanny ability to unearth buried information. He was retired now, living a quiet life in a remote part of Montana, off the grid as much as a former government operative could be. He was a man who valued truth over loyalty to any institution. It took her 3 days to reach Frank, carefully avoiding any digital footprint or traceable communication. She used burner phones, encrypted satellite bursts, and a series of dead drops, a dance of shadows she knew all too well. Finally, a coded message confirmed a meeting point, a forgotten diner on a desolate stretch of highway, miles from anywhere. Frank, older, his face etched with more lines, but his eyes still sharp and inquisitive, greeted her with a nod and a silent understanding. No questions about why she was off the grid, no judgment. He simply listened as Jessica, her voice low and steady, laid out the fragments. David, the WPP, the systematic failures, the ghost agency, and the cryptic RDP. RDP, Frank repeated, his brow furrowed. Never heard of it. Not in any official capacity, anyway. Sounds like a black book operation, deep cover. They spent the next week holed up in a rented cabin, even more remote than Jessica's. Frank's array of ancient and cutting-edge tech spread across every surface. He tapped into dark web archives, scoured decommissioned government servers, and cross-referenced every known WPP failure, with obscure budget allocations and personnel transfers. Jessica, meanwhile, used her deep understanding of agency protocols and human behavior to guide his search, narrowing down the possibilities. It was painstaking work, a slow crawl through a digital minefield. Every lead seemed to evaporate, every potential connection a dead end. The frustration was a constant companion, but Jessica's resolve never wavered. She remembered David's terrified, desperate eyes, Emily's innocent face. This wasn't just a case, it was a personal crusade. Then a flicker. Deep within a heavily encrypted, almost forgotten server used by a disbanded intelligence unit, Frank found it. Not a direct mention, but a series of heavily redacted files, budget codes, and project summaries that, when cross-referenced, pointed to something called Project Chimera. Within Project Chimera, there were subdesignations, and one, almost completely obscured, stood out: Protocol RDP. "This is it," Frank murmured, his voice hushed. "It's buried deeper than anything I've ever seen. Like they didn't just want it hidden. They wanted it erased." They worked for another 72 hours straight, fueled by coffee and a burning need for answers. Jessica, drawing on her specialized training in decryption and psychological profiling, and Frank, with his unparalleled technical prowess, slowly peeled back the layers of obfuscation. They bypassed firewalls, cracked encryption algorithms, and pieced together the fragments of what RDP truly was. The revelation was a punch to the gut, a cold, horrifying truth that settled like ice in Jessica's veins. RDP stood for Reclamation and Disposal Protocol. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a rogue agent. It was a sanctioned, albeit unsanctioned, program born out of the shadows of national security. The protocol had been established years ago, not by the US Marshals Service, but by a clandestine division operating with immense autonomy, answering to no one visible. Its purpose was chillingly clear: to systematically eliminate WPP witnesses and their families who were deemed compromised, redundant, or too knowledgeable. The witnesses weren't just silenced, they were reclaimed. Their assets, their intellectual property, any valuable information they possessed, all were extracted before their disposal. It wasn't about protecting secrets. It was about weaponizing them, about profiting from the very lives they were sworn to protect. The WPP had been a front, a convenient system to identify, track, and ultimately eliminate targets who had witnessed too much, or who could be exploited for their information. David Miller had been a victim of this protocol. His compromise had been a pretext. His death, and the deaths of countless others, were not accidents, not failures of protection, but deliberate, cold-blooded executions carried out under the guise of national security. The ghost agency wasn't a separate entity. It was RDP, a parasitic organism feeding on the very system designed to protect. "My God, Frank," Jessica whispered, the full weight of the betrayal crushing her. "They created a murder program inside the government. They used the Witness Protection Program as a hunting ground." Frank nodded, his face grim. And it wasn't just about eliminating. It was about control. Control of information, control of narratives, control of power. They began to trace the architects, the individuals who had conceived and implemented such a monstrous protocol. The digital trails were faint, cloaked in shell corporations, offshore accounts, and layers of encrypted communications. But Frank, with Jessica's insight, began to identify a pattern. A small elite group of individuals, high level, with seemingly unimpeachable reputations, all connected to a powerful shadowy consulting firm that quietly advised various government agencies. One name kept reappearing, a constant thread woven through the fabric of RDP's inception and ongoing operations: Arthur Hayes. A former director of national intelligence, now a revered figure in the private sector, known for his strategic brilliance and his extensive network of contacts within every intelligence agency. He was charismatic, ruthless, and utterly untouchable. He was the architect. As they closed in, the world around them began to tighten. Frank's systems, usually impenetrable, registered a series of subtle probes, distant digital fingers trying to find their location. A drone, small and silent, was spotted hovering over the desolate highway near their cabin. They were detected. "They know we're getting close, Jess," Frank said, his eyes scanning his screens. "Hayes is covering his tracks. We need to move. Now." Jessica knew what that meant. Frank was now a target. She had brought this danger to him. "You need to disappear, Frank," she commanded, her voice firm. "Go completely dark. I'll handle the rest." Frank, ever the professional, simply nodded. Before he began the process of wiping his systems and vanishing, he pulled up one last, crucial piece of information. "This is a secure server, Jess. A private network Hayes uses. It's got a scheduled data transfer tonight. A location, a time. My guess is it's where he finalizes the disposals." He pointed to a set of coordinates, a remote, heavily fortified compound deep in the Nevada desert. A time flashed on the screen just hours away. Jessica stared at the coordinates, her jaw clenched. The monster now had a name and a lair. The danger was immense, a tidal wave about to crash over her. But the fear was overshadowed by a burning, righteous fury. She would walk into that trap. She would end this. The engine screamed as Jessica pushed the rental car to its absolute limits, the digital map a glowing beacon of her destination. The coordinates led her deep into a forgotten corner of rural Pennsylvania, far from any major highway, down a series of increasingly narrow, unpaved roads. The landscape grew wilder, the trees thicker, the silence more profound, broken only by the roar of her engine and the frantic beat of her own heart. She passed rusted-out mailboxes and crumbling stone walls, remnants of lives long past, until finally, the road ended at a formidable wrought iron gate. Beyond it, a long winding driveway snaked through overgrown grounds towards what looked like an old secluded estate. It wasn't a mansion but a sprawling severe stone structure, partially obscured by towering pines, silent and imposing. This was it, Eleanor Vance's lair. The gate was locked but the lock looked old, rusted. Jessica, fueled by adrenaline, found a heavy rock and smashed it against the padlock until the mechanism groaned and broke apart. She swung the gate open, drove through, and parked the car haphazardly behind a thick cluster of evergreens, hoping to conceal it. The air was cold, damp, carrying the scent of pine and decay. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every rustle of leaves a warning. But Jessica didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy flashlight and the small, but potent stun gun she had acquired, a desperate measure, and began her approach. The grounds were meticulously kept in some areas, wildly overgrown in others, like a mine teetering on the edge of control. She found a service entrance around the back, a heavy wooden door that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. It was unlocked. Too easy. A shiver ran down her spine. Eleanor wasn't hiding. She was waiting. This wasn't just a lair. It was a stage set for her final act. Stepping inside, Jessica was met with a blast of stale air, thick with the smell of old paper and something metallic like ozone. The interior was a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors, heavy oak paneling, and rooms filled with dusty, antique furniture covered in white sheets. It felt like a mausoleum, a place where time had stopped, where secrets had festered for years. She moved slowly, her senses on high alert, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the gloom. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant draft, sent a jolt of alarm through her. She was a mouse in a cat's house, but this mouse had teeth. She found what looked like a converted study, a large room with a massive mahogany desk. Papers were scattered across it, maps, old case files, and a collection of photographs. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Her family, her father, her mother, her brother, their faces smiling innocent, before Eleanor Vance had ripped their world apart. And then there she was, Eleanor Vance, not in the flesh but in a portrait hanging above the fireplace. Younger, sharper, her eyes holding a glint of ambition and something else, something cold and calculating. She looked like a woman who commanded respect, who saw the world in stark black and white, and who believed herself the ultimate arbiter of justice. Suddenly a voice, calm and clear, cut through the silence, making Jessica jump. "I knew you'd come, Jessica. You're your father's daughter. Stubborn, righteous, and utterly predictable." Jessica spun around, flashlight beam sweeping the room. Eleanor was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the corridor. She looked remarkably well for a woman presumed dead for years. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her posture ramrod straight, and her eyes, even in the low light, held an unnerving intensity. She wore a simple dark pantsuit, an echo of her former authority. "Eleanor," Jessica growled, her voice thick with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You're alive." Eleanor smiled, a thin, humorless curve of her lips. "As you can see, the reports of my demise were, as they say, greatly exaggerated. A necessary fiction, I assure you. One orchestrated by those who sought to silence me." She walked further into the room, her movements fluid and confident, as if she owned the very air Jessica breathed. "You want to know why, don't you? Why I did what I did? Why your family and countless others had to die?" Jessica gripped the stun gun, her knuckles white. "Tell me, if you have any semblance of a soul left." Eleanor chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Soul? My dear, my soul was sacrificed on the altar of a corrupt system. I was the head of the Witness Protection Program. I saw it all. The heroes, the villains, the innocent caught in the crossfire. But what I also saw was how easily it could be manipulated. How easily it became a tool for those in power to silence their enemies, to protect their own, to weave a web of deceit that choked the very justice it was meant to uphold." She walked to the desk, running a gloved finger over a stack of old files. "I was a true believer, Jessica. I believed in the sanctity of the program, the absolute necessity of protecting those who dared to speak truth to power. But then I started digging. I found discrepancies, patterns. Witnesses disappearing not just from the program but from existence, their files scrubbed clean. funds siphoned off. And it all led back to a network, a shadowy cabal of powerful individuals, including a certain Senator Maxwell, who used WITSEC as their personal hit squad and information suppression unit. I tried to expose them, Eleanor continued, her voice growing colder, harder. I gathered evidence meticulously, quietly, but they were too entrenched. They moved against me first. They framed me for embezzlement, fabricated evidence, and staged my death to look like a tragic accident, a disgraced official taking her own life. I woke up in a safe house, a ghost, stripped of my identity, my career, my life, all while the people I tried to expose continued their work, unchecked. Jessica stared, a chilling realization dawning on her. So you didn't die. You were put into witness protection. A twisted irony, wouldn't you say? Eleanor's smile was grim. But I refused to be a victim. I refused to let them win. From the shadows, I began my own crusade. If the system was too broken to be fixed, it had to be purged. Every witness who had been manipulated, every agent who had turned a blind eye, every loose end that could expose their network, they all had to be eliminated. Not out of malice, Jessica, but out of necessity, to dismantle the very tools they used, to make them vulnerable. You became what you hated, Jessica whispered, disgusted. You became a monster. I became a surgeon, Eleanor corrected, her eyes flashing. Cutting out the cancer. Your father. He was a good man. One of the few I truly respected. But he was getting too close. He was still investigating my death. Still asking questions about the anomalies I'd uncovered years ago. He was a threat to my ultimate goal, to expose the entire rotten core, not just a few bad apples. His death, your family's deaths, were regrettable but necessary collateral damage in a war far larger than any of you could comprehend. Jessica felt a wave of nausea, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. Her family, reduced to collateral damage. And now you, Eleanor said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You've been tenacious. Impressive for a civilian, but you've served your purpose. You fleshed out the last few lingering threads. The agents who were watching me, the old contacts. You even found my little hideaway. Now you'll be the final tragic end to this story. A rogue agent, driven mad by grief, who finally snapped and took her own life after uncovering a vast conspiracy that was too much for her to bear. Eleanor gestured towards a small, antique pistol resting on a velvet cushion on the desk. It's all set up. A suicide note implicating a few more of the corrupt officials, some fabricated evidence to throw the FBI off the scent, and then oblivion. Your death will be the final spark. The catalyst that forces the public to demand answers, to tear down the very foundations of the program I once cherished. A fitting end, wouldn't you agree? Jessica's mind raced. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a psychological trap, designed to break her, to make her death serve Eleanor's twisted agenda. But Jessica wasn't broken. She was furious. You're wrong, Eleanor, Jessica said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. This isn't your ending. It's mine. And it ends with you. As Eleanor took another step towards her, a triumphant glint in her eyes, Jessica lunged. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't planned, it was pure instinct. She didn't go for the stun gun immediately. Instead, she swung the heavy flashlight in a wide arc, aiming for Eleanor's head. Eleanor, quick for her age, ducked just in time, the flashlight smashing into the wall behind her with a sickening thud, shattering the bulb. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the faint light filtering in from the single window. In the sudden chaos, Jessica activated the stun gun. The high-pitched whine, a terrifying sound in the dark. Eleanor, disoriented, stumbled back, bumping into the desk. Jessica pressed the stun gun against Eleanor's side, holding the trigger. A jolt of electricity surged through Eleanor's body, her muscles seizing up, a guttural cry escaping her lips. She collapsed to the floor, convulsing, the small pistol clattering from the desk. Jessica stood over her, breathing heavily, the stun gun still humming in her hand. It was done. The monster was down. But the fight wasn't over. She knew Eleanor's network, her influence ran deep. Just then, the heavy front door of the estate crashed open, and the beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness. Jessica, are you in here? It was Michael. His voice, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. Michael, I'm in the study. She's here. Jessica yelled, her voice hoarse. Michael burst into the room, his face etched with concern, a Glock held steady in his hand. He took in the scene. The broken flashlight, the struggling Eleanor on the floor, Jessica standing over her stun gun still active. "Eleanor Vance," Michael breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and grim satisfaction. "You were right, Jessica. All of it." He quickly secured Eleanor, binding her with zip ties he carried. "I tracked your car. And I called David. The FBI is on their way." Jessica felt an immense wave of relief wash over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. She lowered the stun gun, her hand shaking. She admitted everything, Michael. About Senator Maxwell, about the corruption, about why she faked her death and why she started all this. Michael nodded, his gaze hardening. "We'll get it all. Every last shred of evidence. We'll bring down the whole rotten network she spoke of. Your family, Jessica. They won't have died in vain." As the distant wail of sirens grew louder, approaching the secluded estate, Jessica looked down at Eleanor Vance, who lay defeated, her eyes now devoid of their former fire, replaced by a chilling emptiness. The woman who had orchestrated so much pain and death, who had twisted a noble purpose into a horrific crusade, was finally brought to justice. Jessica stepped back, leaning against the dusty bookshelves, the weight of the last few months finally beginning to lift. The scars would remain deep and aching, but the burning fury was slowly being replaced by something else. A quiet, fierce resolve. She had walked into the trap. She had faced the monster. And she had, against all odds, emerged. The witness protection program had failed many, including her family, but in its failure, it had forged a survivor, a truth seeker, who had finally brought the darkness to light. The world she knew was still a dangerous place, full of shadows and secrets. But for the first time in a long time, Jessica felt like she could breathe again, ready to face whatever came next. Justice, though delayed and hard-won, had finally arrived.